Welcome to Forum 360 on Fusion, your PBS channel and your Rubber City radio stations. I'm Leslie Ungar, your host today. We admire them. Sometimes we envy them. Sometimes we criticize them. Some people want to be like them, or they think they want to be the next Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. Today, we are going to look at entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. We're going to look at these concepts and real emerging businesses that have been inspired by and taught by the entrepreneurship program at the University of Akron, the Fitzgerald Institute for Entrepreneurial Studies. Since its inception in 1995, over 1,000 students have taken entrepreneurship courses. Our guests today are Professor Bob Chalfant, Harvard MBA, and leading the entrepreneur program at Fitzgerald Institute, and one of the graduates and the true success stories of the program, Courtney Gras. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Leslie.
I'm going to start with you, Bob. From an academic standpoint, what is an entrepreneur?
Entrepreneurs are the people who identify an opportunity. They can look at something where other people see the status quo. They can say, well, what if? And then they can come up with a new idea and develop that idea into something that is really desired by the marketplace.
Now, can you give me an example of something, product or service, that an entrepreneur looked at and saw differently than the rest of the world?
I'm trying to think of a good example. Okay, who would have thought that the auto industry needs a new kind of car? And yet Elon Musk looked at the cars and says, I can do better. I can make a car that doesn't pollute and drives halfway across the United States.
So are we all going to be driving a battery-operated car someday, soon?
I don't know. There's going to be multiple fuels available.
But it'll be an option. It may be an option.
Yeah, certainly. Electric cars are going to become more price competitive. They're going to become more longer distance driving vehicles.
Because of an entrepreneur.
Because of a superior entrepreneur.
Yes.
Elon Musk is he's unbelievable.
As a working entrepreneur, Courtney, how would you define what an entrepreneur is?
I think that entrepreneurs are problem solvers. So I think that we actually are very good at identifying what frustrates us and then saying, you know what, this frustrates me so much. They get motivation from that and they say, you know what, I want to go out and solve this problem. They recognize need and then they come up with a solution. They take the initiative to create a solution to that problem. And so I think that entrepreneurs, all the problem solvers of the world that really take motivation and kind of marry that with action and then produce some kind of a result. So that could be in a business, or there's even, I think, entrepreneurship can be defined in other ways too, not even just for-profit companies.
Now, when someone asks you, what do you do? For my clients, as a communication coach, I have this walk across the room exercise that I make them walk across the room and answer that question in the time it takes to walk across the room. Yeah. So how do you answer the question? When someone asks you, what do you do? How does the entrepreneur side of you answer that question?
I'd almost answer it the same way, and I say I solve problems, honestly, because day to day in a startup company, you're always putting out fires. And so when you're in a small group, you're just starting out, you had to listen to feedback from your customers, you have to listen to feedback from your internal team, so you're always working on solving problems, and so that's what I think that I do on a day-to-day basis, is I'm a problem solver.
Now when someone asks you, okay, you're a professor at the University of Akron, what do you teach? How do you answer that?
I teach the entrepreneurship program at the University of Akron. I try to inspire my students to change the world, make $1 million, and come to work in their jeans. I love that the kids get inspired by that. It's just something they can identify with.
Now, if there was one piece of advice that you would give to college students or anyone that thought they wanted to be an entrepreneur, what one piece of advice from kind of two different standpoints, from someone that's just started out as an entrepreneur in the last few years and someone that has been teaching entrepreneurs and has worked on the working side of the world, what one piece of advice would you give an entrepreneur, spirited person?
Well, I guess I'll start off and try to answer this. You know what? I would say, first of all, anybody can do it. You don't have to have, a family that traditionally started companies. Really, entrepreneurship is for anybody if you have the motivation and you take the initiative to start on it. So I think that anybody could be successful with entrepreneurship as long as they have grit. They stick with it, they keep trying, and that they actually see failure as an opportunity. I think that anybody can be successful in their own way.
Courtney did mention a very important point. They take the initiative. They get out and do it. I mean, ideas are a dime a dozen.
Yes, we've all talked about it.
Everybody's got ideas.
I thought of that. I thought of that, but didn't do anything about it.
And in fact, one of my students this semester wrote up a little note and said, Bob, I thought of this 5 years ago. And then I find out it's on the market. And he's kicking himself. They don't do, if the people who are not entrepreneurs can think of things, everybody's creative, but if they don't take the initiative and at least write it down and start making progress on it. I've taught lots of classes outside of the University of Akron too, and the first advice I give people is write down your ideas, and they won't even do that. They just have an idea, and they're not entrepreneurs.
Well, now, Einstein said that imagination was more important than intelligence. Where do you weigh in on that?
Oh, yeah. Unrewarded intelligence is almost a cliche. A lot of people are smart and they go through life unrewarded. But if you are creative and curious about things, the more curious you are, the more things you will see.
One time I was interviewing Campy Russell from the Cleveland Cavaliers, the first time LeBron was
He lives
here.
4 doors down the street from me.
Well, he's kind of doing the show next month.
Wow.
And I asked him, it was LeBron's first tour through the Cavs, and I asked him if they would be better that year, and he said it depended how curious the players other than LeBron were about how much better they could be. So it's interesting that you say curious and you're talking about business. He's talking about curious and talking about sports and competing, but you're both talking about being curious. Isn't that interesting? So let me ask you each, if you had to identify one skill that was most needed as an entrepreneur, what would that one skill be?
Well, I think I name dropped it already. I think grit is the most important skill, and grit's kind of a buzzword now. We're starting to hear a lot about it, and it's again, it's motivation with endurance. So the ability to keep up your motivation to achieve a goal, it's almost analogous to running a marathon. So
let me
keep going.
Let me ask this question: when, as an entrepreneur, do you stay with it out of grit, and when do you look in that honest mirror and say, no, I've got to stop. It's not the right time, or I don't have the funding, or whatever it is. So how do you know that line between grit and giving up?
I would say that anytime, a lot of times, we talk about pivoting in startup companies, and that's really critical because a lot of people will get married to their first product idea, and it's so important when you're a startup to be able to take feedback. So I think that, as an entrepreneur, we're also always looking externally. So we're not just looking internally at our organization and what we're doing right, but we're also taking feedback from the community and saying, okay, what can we improve upon? So I think that, grit is enduring through change and pivoting. So it's not necessarily, not giving up, but it's knowing when to pivot.
Pivoting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I like that. Yeah. That's one skill, grit. And what would you identify as one skill?
I think entrepreneurs have to be salespeople. They are selling everything. They're selling their idea, they're selling their company, they're selling themselves. They have to sell it to everybody, the employees, the customers, the investors, everybody in the community. They're selling everything all the time.
From your experience, is it difficult for the person who created the idea, basically gave birth to that idea, to understand that not everyone sees that idea the way they do until they bring it to life? And in my world of communication, the only way they can bring it to life is through communication. Yeah. But is it hard for them to see it differently than the rest of the world does?
As Courtney says, they're married to their idea. This is my baby. And nobody's going to tell me that I have an ugly baby. So that's the way they feel about it in many cases. In some cases, when they're rational and when they can actually listen to a customer, and they can take negative feedback and say, I can learn from this, and I learn more from negative feedback than everybody telling me what a great job I'm doing.
Right, doesn't help at all.
I mean, it's like like getting.
I call it gold. I call it negative feedback gold. It's all gold.
Yeah, but it's like a root canal without the anesthetic.
So,
you hate it, but you got to do it.
So then let me ask you, you both have mentioned the value of failure. So how do you learn from failure and catapult to the next level and not get kind of mired into the quicksand of failure?
Well, I think, even with my personal experience, the startup hasn't been all, roses the whole time. And I think that when you can take a step back, you'll be emotional about it for a while, and I think that's a natural human response. But I think that if you let time pass by, you kind of disconnect yourself from the emotion of a failure situation, and you actually document what went wrong. So you could write it out and say, okay, this is what happened, and here's where there might be an opportunity for me to do something differently. So if you could do that, kind of disconnect the negative emotion, write it down almost methodically, like you're in a class, trying to see a learning opportunity from that, then you could turn failure into something positive.
Is that a place where you think it's an advantage being an engineer with that engineer-like mind? Do you think that you can more easily identify and pull away from the emotion because of your background?
Maybe. I think it's very different depending on the person. So a lot of it gets down to, how you interact with people, how you deal with failure as an individual. So I wouldn't say in particular that being an engineer has changed that one way or the other for me, but I think it's more of a personal situation.
And how do you counsel students about failure? First of all, how do you prepare them? I mean, you don't want to disillusion them, but certainly they have to be prepared.
No, I'm not gonna paint a rosy picture. It's not all unicorns and butterflies.
How do you talk about failure from an academic
standpoint? I tell them
standpoint?
straight up, you're going to fail. So when it happens, not if it happens, but when it happens, look at it, try to analyze what went wrong, and go out and try again. If you're going to try again, of course, make a new mistake.
Don't keep making the same
Don't
mistake.
make the same mistake twice.
When I was first learning how to ride, I showed horses for a long time, and the best advice I think I ever got through college, undergraduate, graduate school, I don't care where it was, the best advice I ever got was 20 falls make a good rider. Because every time I fell off, I was so happy because I was closer to being a good rider.
Oh.
So it's kind of like 20 failures make a good entrepreneur or a successful entrepreneur. Then every time you have a failure, you're like, yay, I got one down.
Yeah.
I'm that much closer.
I've had to close companies and lay off people, so yeah, and it's a terrible feeling. It drains you emotionally, it affects your life, but you have to be able to pull yourself up and try again, because that's what winners do.
Now, is there any kind of a statistic for what percentage of, quote, entrepreneurs are successful entrepreneurs, for whatever your definition of successful is?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I know that if we look at the number of companies funded by a venture capitalist, maybe half of them might be successful on average. If we look at the number of women-owned businesses that are funded by venture capitalists, closer to 75% are successful. So there is a gender gap in the investment community. 97% of the funded companies are run by men.
Wow,
so
97%.
Yeah, you can't just say,
Thank
well,
you, Courtney.
Yeah,
Thank you,
trying.
Thank you, Courtney.
Yeah. Today we are learning about entrepreneurship, what it is and why it's important to the fabric of Northeast Ohio, with Professor Bob Chalfant, Harvard MBA, and leading the entrepreneur program at the University of Akron, and one of the graduates and successful entrepreneurs, Courtney Gras. What motivates an entrepreneur?
Not money. People think, oh, I want to go out and make a lot of money, I'll be an entrepreneur. That is not what motivates an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs are motivated by wanting to make things right, wanting to correct a wrong, wanting to make sure that something good stays alive. That's what motivates an entrepreneur. They go out and they do it because, I hate to use the word passion, but they know in their heart that it's important, and they will do it, and that's what motivates them.
What is, as a generalization, and no generalizations are true, but completely, but as a generalization, what would be an entrepreneur's greatest fear? Because it wouldn't be failure.
I think for me, my greatest fear would not having an opportunity to be an entrepreneur anymore. I think going back to Bob's last comment, you know, part of it, particularly for my generation, you read a lot of articles now about millennials wanting more independence and more control over their careers, and so I think that a lot of why my generation goes into entrepreneurship is because they want that independence. They want to sort of create their own empire and have control over their lives, you know, work in their pajamas if they want to. So I think that, at least speaking for my personal situation and a lot of my generation, I think our greatest fear would be for somebody to tell us, go back to the office and work 9 to 5. I think that would be horrible for us.
Now, let me ask you, in the time, figuratively, that it takes to walk across the room, tell us about your company.
So my company is a clean tech startup company. We are making technology to ease the integration and reduce cost in battery packs. So in electric vehicles would be one example, going back to the Tesla application. And we spun the company out of the University of Akron back in 2012, and we've been operating out of the Akron Global Business Accelerator since then.
Now, how would you define success with the company that you gave birth to when you were in college? How would you define success as an entrepreneur?
For Design Flux, I would say if we could get our system installed and doing exactly what we've designed it to do, even just in one application, to see it be used would be successful. You know, even if we don't IPO or become a billion-dollar company, we want to see what we created, you know, our brainchild, the value being valuable to somebody else. We want to have, you know, the greater population think, oh yeah, what they did is worthwhile. That's what we would really love.
This is very telling. She just wants to see her product, her design implemented. She doesn't want to be a millionaire. You probably do.
Oh, well, it's a side benefit.
But if it happens, great.
Still cash
as
that
long
check.
as the product gets out there.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you can see it in use, and something that you've done in your life is important.
Exactly.
Now,
that's what entrepreneurs love.
Does an entrepreneur have to live in a specific country or part of the country? Does that increase their odds in any way, or are we global enough that you could choose a location that you want?
I have seen entrepreneurs from all over the country be wildly successful. Again, this is just my personal experience, but you know, each region has its unique advantages and disadvantages, and sometimes, you know, we live in a global world, so we have to reach out. So we found, you know, for our startup, we found a ton of opportunity right here in Northeast Ohio. But at the same time, we haven't closed off our doors to resources from out of state. So I think you have to look globally, you know, look nationally for those opportunities. But I don't think there's anything stopping you, you know, if you're in the middle of Nebraska from starting a successful tech company. Not at all.
Now, you know, Shark Tank has introduced most of America, at least to some concepts that most people probably wouldn't know, and one of those is funding. So you get an idea. How do you go about looking for funding for your idea?
Sure. Well, I could start on that. I guess it depends on the product. So, for instance, for my company, you won't see us necessarily on Kickstarter or the Shark Tank because we have a business-to-business type of a product. We aren't making a consumer product. Now, for other startup companies, they might take advantage of the crowdfunding or they might end up on the Shark Tank. So it depends on where you are and what type of product you're making.
Is there a typical day for an entrepreneur? You've worked with many. You are an entrepreneur. Is there a typical day? Is there a typical length of day for an entrepreneur?
Long days, typically. There's always 100 things to be done. But what you try to accomplish is set your milestones. And then I want to be here at this point in time. There's a milestone I want to reach. In order to reach that milestone, what are the activities I need to accomplish in order to reach that? And underneath that is, all right, what tasks do I have to accomplish today? So you go in and you have a list of tasks that you like to accomplish. That's the theory.
So that you can find success before you actually get to the end of the rainbow.
Well, the path, the journey is a series of small successes that lead up to big successes.
Now,
you have a series of small failures while you're at it too.
Yes, I like to call that organized chaos.
Organized chaos, right.
Yeah.
Do you find that at the University of Akron, do startups tend to be in one category? Are they more high-tech? Are they more product-oriented? Are they more idea-oriented or services? Do you find that they come from any one?
We've had a lot of startups. There's a number of programs at the University of Akron. One is the I-Corps program run out of the University of Akron Research Foundation, We have an innovation practice center, a proof of concept center. We have a social entrepreneurship program starting with the College of Arts and Sciences. So there's a lot of activities, and that means that we're bringing technologies out of the engineering college, the polymer college. We're also bringing out social entrepreneurship programs that benefit large numbers of people. Not necessarily a not-for-profit. Not-for-profit is simply an IRS designation. A company still has to be able to sustain itself. So we've got social entrepreneurship programs coming out. We have things like sensors in a tactile feedback kind of system for robot fingers so they can feel how hard they're pressing or if something is slipping out of their grasp. Really cool stuff coming up.
Now, we were talking before we went on air about whether entrepreneurs were risk takers or not. I see them as risk takers, and you see them as calculated. You don't really take risks because they're very calculated. But do you find in non-work time, is an entrepreneur, do they do the same kind of things in non-work time, or are they the ones zip-lining and jumping out of planes?
I don't think that's a good stereotype, but I don't think it's
Well,
just
we're here to bust those
we're
stereotypes.
normal people.
Yeah, we're people too.
Tell me, in the few minutes that we have left, because I have like 100 questions that I could pick your brains
When
forever.
I'm not at work, I'm riding my motorcycle, so maybe
Maybe
we're risk takers.
Maybe
Yeah.
we'll find out a little bit more as we go on. What is a sacrifice that someone has to make to be a successful entrepreneur?
Your significant other has to be with you. They have to support it. Being an entrepreneur and focusing all of your energy on this baby can wreck a relationship if the relationship isn't strong and your significant other is not with you or doesn't agree.
I would also say your social life sometimes has to take a hit, unfortunately. Mm-hmm.
Now, excluding your company, is there a company or a business that you admire, either how they operate today or how they were conceived as an entrepreneurial concept? Is there a company that you've tried to model yourself after?
Well, see, my mind jumped immediately to SpaceX. But then when you say, do we model ourselves after that? Well, no, because we're much smaller than them. But I really admired how the motivation and the idea behind SpaceX and how it got started.
And we should know them?
SpaceX, yes.
Another Elon Musk company.
Another Elon Musk company, yes.
Thank you,
Exactly.
Elon. See, there's a reason that, was it Colbert had him on his first week? See, there was a reason that he had him on his first week.
Exactly.
Elon Musk invented PayPal. That's where he made his billions.
I didn't know I had Elon to thank for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as someone that really watches the kind of entrepreneurial scene, what is a company that you would point out to model either, success or their organizational, chart, or what are some companies that you admire?
There's the usual suspects. Amazon. Jeff Bezos is the most admired CEO in the world. He came out and he wanted to disintermediate the bookstores, but he didn't want to do it with just 500,000 titles. He'll put 5 million titles online. And then he just started selling everything. Mm-hmm. And I asked my students, why isn't Sears, who had the Sears catalog, why aren't they Amazon? They were selling everything through a catalog. They didn't see it.
So what's the difference between the people that see it and the people that don't see it, in a few words? Is it genetic? Are you born with it? What's the difference?
It has to be your inner motivations. You just are so disappointed with the way things work now. I would every time I see a new product, I look at the design of it and I say, oh, I could have done better. I should have done better.
But they did good enough to get it on the market.
Yeah, woulda, coulda, shoulda doesn't get you there.
And that's why there's iPhone 6.
Yeah.
Because they didn't wait for perfection.
Oh, and that's the other thing. Kodak. In its defense, Kodak was not an electronics manufacturer. They did not know how to make digital cameras, even though they owned the patent. Steve Sasson, 24 years old, invented the digital camera. They said, nope, we're in the film business. The point is that big companies can't make that pivot. They're in business to protect their existing business model. And that's why small companies can disrupt them.
So, in a word, your most satisfying moment so far in your company's young career?
Being able to hire students, I think that's been the most satisfying thing.
And your most satisfying in your years as teaching or as doing, can you identify a most satisfying moment?
I get I love it when I see my students go out and actually start a business. And I've got at least a dozen students. One team that we started with, not this past summer, the summer before last, they're still developing their software product, and we've been using it in the classroom and at the Archangel's investor meetings. So I love it when my students are successful.
Some words like entrepreneur, we don't really think about the definition, what it means, and how it's changed our world. We use it today, perhaps we'll know a little bit more about what's the difference between an entrepreneur and the rest of us mere mortals. To help us understand what an entrepreneur is and their important role in our society, our guests today have been Bob Chalfant from the University of Akron Fitzgerald Institute, and Courtney Gras, recently named on one of the top 40 under 40 in the clean tech industries. Thank you for joining us on Forum 360. I'm Leslie Ungar.
Forum 360 is brought to you with support from Electric Impulse Communications, Kim and Harvey Nelson, Rubber City Radio Group, Akronist.com, AkronBuzz.com, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Forum 360 supporters, and the Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron.